The Tribunal of Interstellar Accountability had been sitting for 11 days before it called the human. It had not been designed to call the human. The original charter, drafted by the Conclave of Settled Worlds, ratified by 9 member species in the 42nd year of the Compact, had reserved the accused's chair for commanders and ministers, for the people who had ordered the things that happened at Verath Station. But the Conclave's senior prosecutor, Adjudicant Sul Karath, had added a late amendment, a provision for what the charter called associated causal parties, which was legal language for anyone Karath decided had contributed to the circumstances. The amendment had passed 3-2 in closed session, with 2 of the tribunal's 5 jurists abstaining. The human associated causal party was Davin Rail. He was 24 years old, and he had been a signals officer on the ISV Vance during the operation at Verath. He had relayed an order. He had not given it. That distinction had not made it into the prosecution summary, and Davin had read the prosecution summary 7 times in the past 11 days, so he was certain of what it did and did not contain. He walked into the tribunal chamber on the morning of the 12th day, carrying a flat document case and nothing else. The chamber was the joint construction of 3 species architectural traditions: dark Kelhari stone beneath his feet, vaulted arching borrowed from the Sethori homeworld's old judicial buildings, and the Conclave's preference for wide, steeply raked galleries that seated the audience above the chamber floor in descending tiers. Anyone standing at the accused's podium looked up at a wall of faces. There were perhaps 300 observers in the gallery today, more than there had been for any of the previous 11 sessions. Davin set his case on the defense table and sat down. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at Adjudicant Karath, who was already at the prosecution podium with his team of 6 arranged behind him like a formal display. He opened the case and removed a single stack of documents, squared them with a careful adjustment of his thumb along the edge, and set them parallel to the table's edge. Karath had the look of someone who had conducted these proceedings many times and expected this one to go the way the others had. He was a tall, gray-scaled Sethori with a formal white collar crest that indicated senior judicial standing. His voice, when he spoke, was the professional voice of someone already thinking about the next session after this one. The tribunal acknowledges the presence of the human associated party, Davin Rail, signals officer of record during the Verath Station engagement. He did not look up from his document. The prosecution will proceed directly to examination. Presiding jurist Mevan, the tribunal's chair, a Kelhari woman of perhaps 60 years, with the close-cropped gray scale of a senior judicial appointee and the particular stillness of someone who has decided she will not rush any part of what is about to happen, said nothing to this. She had said very little during the prior 11 sessions. Davin had read all 11 transcripts. She listened carefully, and she decided nothing until the record gave her something to decide from. Officer Rail, Karath said, on the 17th day of the 9th month of the 42nd compact year, at approximately the 4th hour, you relayed a targeting instruction from Commander Bren Aldies of the ISV Vance to the forward gunnery coordination node. That instruction resulted in the destruction of the secondary habitat ring at Verath Station, with the loss of 412 civilian lives. Is this an accurate account of the documented record? Davin looked at him for a moment. The relay happened. The rest of that statement is the prosecution's characterization of the record, not the record itself. A murmur moved through the gallery tiers. Karath's crest lifted slightly. Officer Rail, the destruction of the secondary habitat ring is not in dispute. No, Davin said. It isn't. He placed one hand flat on his stack of documents. What is in dispute is the record the tribunal has been working from. Karath looked at the presiding jurist. Mevan gave a small, level nod. Karath looked back at Davin and said, in the tone of someone conceding a formality he considered harmless, "The floor is yours." Davin stood up. The Tribunal has entered into evidence, as its primary documentary basis, the operational log of Conclave Sector Command covering the Varath Station engagement. That log was submitted by the prosecution on day 2. I have been furnished a copy. He picked up the top 3 sheets from his stack and held them up briefly. This is the chain of custody form for that submission. The log was transferred from Conclave Sector Command's secure archive to the Tribunal's evidence office on the 43rd day of the 8th month of this year, 22 days before the Tribunal was formally convened. He set the sheets down. The log was in Conclave Sector Command's custody for 22 days before the Tribunal existed to receive it. The gallery was quiet, not the quiet of boredom, the quiet of 300 people doing the same arithmetic at the same time. I also have, Davin continued, a copy of the original operational log from the same engagement, recovered from the ISV Vance's own Black Record archive. The Vance's archive is maintained by the Compact Merchant Fleet Authority, not by Conclave Sector Command. It stores automatically, without human intervention, on a 36-hour cycle. The copy I have was pulled from that archive on the day the Tribunal was convened, and has not passed through any Conclave-administered custody at any point. He set a second document stack on the table beside the first. They are not the same document. The quiet in the gallery changed quality. It had been the quiet of people watching a proceeding that had already been decided. It was now the quiet of people watching something else, something that had not been scheduled, had not been prepared for, and could not be walked back. One of the 5 jurists on the bench, a younger Sethari with blue-gray scales and the narrow collar of a junior appointment, looked at the presiding jurist. Meven had not moved. She was reading. Kareth set down his stylus. The prosecution objects to the introduction of uncertified. The Compact Merchant Fleet Authority certified the archive pull at the time of retrieval, Davin said. The certification is on the first page, and the authentication comparison between the 2 documents was conducted by the Compact Treaty Archive's own document examination office, not by me. He picked up a third document and set it on the presiding jurist's bench before Kareth could continue. Page 44. I submitted the comparison request on day 4 of these proceedings and received the results on day 9. I waited for the correct procedural moment to enter them. A member of the prosecution team, a younger Sethari with a narrower crest than Kareth's, leaned forward and said something in a low voice near Kareth's ear. Kareth did not respond. His crest had begun to settle from its formal height, which in Sethori physiology indicated a condition their language named in 5 syllables, and which had no precise human equivalent, but which Davin had learned to read during the prior 11 days as something between reassessment and acute exposure. The differences between the 2 logs, Davin said. He kept his voice level and precise, the voice of a person reciting what is already established rather than arguing for what he hopes to establish. The operational log submitted by the prosecution contains an entry at the 4th hour on the 17th day. ISV Vance requests emergency authorization for engagement at Varath Station's secondary habitat ring due to confirmed weapons cache identification. Authorization granted by Sector Command, countersigned by Deputy Adjudicant Sul Karath. He paused for exactly as long as it took presiding jurist Meven to lift her eyes from the document and look at Karath. That entry does not appear in the Vance's own Black Record archive copy. The Vance's archive shows no emergency request at the 4th hour. It shows a standing engagement order issued 17 hours earlier. At the 11th hour of the 16th day, pre-authorizing targeting of any Varath Station structure identified as a weapons cache by the Forward Combat Assessment Node. The delegation member in the second gallery tier who had been leaning forward was now fully upright and still. The engagement order, Davin continued, was issued before Commander Aldi's made any weapons cache identification, before I relayed any instruction. The The identification process under a standing pre-authorization was not a procedural check. It was a formality. The decision to place the Vance in a targeting position had already been made 17 hours before anyone aboard that ship knew the secondary ring would be flagged. He lifted the Vance archive copy from his stack and placed it on the presiding jurist's bench alongside the authentication comparison. The pre-authorization order is on page 11. The counter-signature is the same signature as the one on the amended entry in the prosecution's submitted log. He sat down. The chamber held 300 observers and 5 jurists and 1 prosecution team, and none of them were moving in the particular way of people who are trying to determine whether something they just heard was what they thought they heard. In the second gallery tier, a Sethori observer, one of the conclave's own diplomatic liaison staff, wearing the 3-stripe collar of a senior posting, had opened a small notation device and was no longer writing anything on it. He was sitting with it open in his hands and his eyes fixed on the presiding jurist's bench. 2 seats to his left, a Kelhari journalist had her recording equipment active and had stopped looking at the prosecution table entirely. Karath had not moved from his podium. He stood with one hand flat on its surface and his white crest folded completely, and he had the particular expression of someone calculating the distance between where he was standing and every exit in the chamber simultaneously. His legal team behind him had the look of people who have just understood, with the clarity that always comes too late, that they had been present for something and had not seen it coming, and that their names were going to appear in whatever record came next. Meven looked at the documents in front of her for a long moment. She did not touch them. Then she looked at Karath. Karath's white collar crest remained flat against his shoulders, a state Davin had not seen on him during 11 days of proceedings, not during testimony from 3 fleet officers, not during cross-examination of 2 conclave archive clerks, not during any of the moments Karath had arranged to go badly for the people sitting where Davin was sitting now. Adjudicant Karath, Meven said. The prosecution submitted operational log. Did it pass through your office prior to submission? The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. It passed through Sector Command's custody archive, Karath said, under standard evidence preparation protocols. Under your countersignature authority. Another 4 seconds. I countersign custody transfers in my role as Deputy Archive Officer. Meven set the authentication comparison face down on the bench with the deliberate care of someone, deciding what the record should show about this moment. Then she looked at Karath with the expression of someone who has been holding judgment in reserve for a long time and no longer has any reason to hold it. She looked at him the way a building looks at the thing that has been undermining its foundation, not with anger, but with the full weight of what has been established. The tribunal will recess for 48 hours, she said. Evidence Counsel will take possession of both logs for independent technical examination. The prosecution is to have no contact with either document during this period. The proceedings against the associated causal party are suspended until examination is complete. She looked at Davin. Officer Rail, is there anything else you wish to enter before recess? No, presiding jurist. Then you are free to remain or to leave. He gathered his documents in the order he had set them down. He closed his case with the quiet click of latches seating properly. He stood. He did not look at Karath. He did not look at the gallery, where 300 observers sat in the stillness of people who would be describing this morning for a long time, in the particular way that people describe things they watched happen that they had not believed were possible to watch happen. He did not look at the junior jurist, who had leaned toward Meven and was saying something urgent that Meven was not responding to. He looked at presiding jurist Meven, and she looked back at him with the neutral gravity appropriate to what this chamber had just become, and neither of them said anything more. He walked out through the chamber's dark stone entrance arch, and the sound of the gallery behind him, 300 people beginning to move and speak at once. The sound of a room releasing a breath it had been holding reached him as he crossed the threshold. And then the door closed, and there was only the corridor, and the quiet of a building that did not yet know what it had just become. The technical examination took 31 hours. The examiners were drawn from 2 independent bodies: the Compact Treaty Archives technical staff and a separate panel appointed by the Tribunal's own evidence counsel, arriving at the same conclusion. When the Tribunal reconvened, the prosecution's submitted log was formally designated an altered document and withdrawn from evidence. A conclave sector command inquiry was opened the same afternoon. 3 archive officers were suspended pending its outcome, along with the custody officer who had held the log during the 22-day pre-convening window. A conclave internal oversight commission requested access to sector command's archive correspondence for the 60 days preceding the tribunal's convening. Adjudicant Sul Karath resigned his prosecution role the following morning. His resignation letter was 9 sentences. It did not mention Verath Station. The proceedings against Davin Rail were dismissed in full on the grounds of evidentiary insufficiency. The dismissal document made no finding on the underlying facts. The tribunal had learned, in the way that institutions learn things they cannot afterward unsay, to choose its language with care. The families of the 412 people who died in the secondary habitat ring received no new answers from these proceedings. They had received none from the previous 11 days either. Davin understood the gap between what he had done and what those families needed, and he carried it with him when he walked out of the chamber, and he would carry it for a long time after. What he had stopped was a tribunal from convicting a 24-year-old signals officer for relaying an order that someone else had arranged to look, in the submitted record, like a choice. He had stopped it with 30 pages of documents, a certified comparison form, and the discipline to wait across 11 days of someone else's proceedings for the correct procedural moment. That was the work. That was what the work had required. He had done it, and it was done, and the chamber behind him held 5 jurists and 300 observers, and a prosecution team that would not be a prosecution team by morning. He did not look back.